It was a quiet night when everything in my world changed. The clock had just struck 1 in the morning, and the stillness of the house felt heavier than usual. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard a faint knock at the front door. At first, I thought I imagined it, a sound too soft to be real, too timid to belong to anyone confident. But then it came again, sharper this time, trembling, desperate. I rose from my bed, the wooden floor cold under my bare feet. The night air was heavy and smelled faintly of rain. My heart thudded as I reached for the doorknob. Who could be here at this hour? I pulled the door open, and there she was, my daughter. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, her eyes swollen from crying. Strands of her hair clung to her cheeks, wet from tears. She looked at me like a child who had just woken from a nightmare. And then, before I could even speak, she collapsed against me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking into a sob. "He hit me." I froze. For a moment, my brain refused to understand what I had just heard. I held her tighter, feeling her body shake in my arms. My daughter, my baby, had always been strong-willed, independent, and brave. The last thing I ever imagined was seeing her like this, trembling and broken. I guided her inside, helping her sit on the couch. The moonlight through the curtains cast soft silver lines across her face, revealing a bruise on her cheek and a cut near her lip. My heart clenched painfully. "Tell me what happened," I said softly, though every muscle in my body was screaming for revenge. She tried to speak, but words caught in her throat. Between sobs, fragments spilled out, an argument, a phone call, a woman's voice, and then his anger exploding like a storm. My son-in-law had discovered that she found out about his affair. When she confronted him, instead of guilt, he responded with violence. I listened, my hands trembling on her shoulders. I wanted to scream, to drive to his house that very moment, to make him regret ever laying a finger on her. But she needed me calm, not furious. I swallowed the fire in my chest and focused on her shaking hands. "Did you call the police?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I just ran. I didn't know where else to go." I brushed her hair back and kissed her forehead. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. You're safe now." But deep inside, a darker voice whispered, "Safe for now." I made her some tea, though I knew she wouldn't drink it. She just sat there on the couch, staring at the steam rising from the cup, lost in the fog of her own thoughts. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her, waiting. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. After a while, she whispered, "Mom, I think he's been seeing her for months." I ignored the signs, the late-night meetings, the constant texting, the sudden temper when I asked questions. Her voice cracked again. "I thought he loved me." My heart broke all over again. How could someone so gentle, who gave everything to her marriage, end up like this? I took her hand in mine. "You can't blame yourself for his sins. Love doesn't give anyone the right to hurt you." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. I left everything there. My purse, my phone. I just ran. "It's okay," I said softly. "We'll fix it tomorrow. You're home now." But my mind was already planning. I would not let him get away with this. Not this time. Not after what he did. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains, soft and golden. My daughter was asleep in the guest room, her face peaceful but bruised. I stood by the window, watching the quiet street outside, my thoughts running wild. I knew what the law could do and what it couldn't. Men like him always found a way to twist stories, to cry innocence. Not this time. I picked up my phone and called my old friend Clara, a retired police officer. "Clara," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need to report a domestic assault. My son-in-law hit my daughter last night." Her voice sharpened. "Is she safe now?" Yes, she's with me. Good, don't go near him. Let the police handle it. I promised her I wouldn't, but deep down, I already knew that promise was a lie. By noon, 2 officers came to take my daughter's statement. She sat at the kitchen table, trembling, trying to remember every detail. I stood behind her, my hand on her shoulder, giving silent strength. When the officers left, she looked at me and said quietly, "He's going to hate me for this." "No." I replied, "He's going to fear you." That night, after she fell asleep, I couldn't close my eyes. I walked around the house, each step echoing in the dark. The memories of her childhood flooded back. Her first steps, her laughter, her tears when she scraped her knee. I raised her to be strong, but life had been cruel. Around 2 a.m., I sat by the window again, the moon hanging low. A storm was brewing outside. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have told anyone." My stomach turned to ice. It was him. I read it again and again. Then, without thinking, I typed back, "You'll answer to me soon." I pressed send. I hit send before I could think about consequences. The message left the safety of my phone like a shot. And for a second I regretted it, not because I feared him, but because I knew what kind of man he was when pushed. He didn't do subtle. He did threats, grandstanding, and he liked witnesses. The rest of that day was a blur of urgent, practical things. I made sure Sarah had clean clothes, changed the linens on the sofa, and put together a small bag with the essentials: pajamas, a spare phone, some cash, and a list of numbers she could call at any hour. I called Miss Camila and asked quietly and directly if she would keep Sarah safe. Camila squeezed my hand and said, "Bring her over now." No questions. Those 4 words felt like a prophecy: shelter, witness, neighborly loyalty. By noon, I was in a taxi with a manila envelope on my lap that contained everything. The photos I'd taken with the flash that made bruises look like paintings of violence. The USB with the neighbor's footage, the printout of the CT results, and a neat stack of written notes, times, dates. The fragments Sarah was brave enough to say aloud. I had grown up with paperwork, receipts, records, the ledger of a life. Today, that ledger would tell the truth. James Ellison, our family lawyer, and the only man I trusted to speak plainly, listened without interrupting. He flipped through the photos, slid the USB into his laptop, played the clip. The tiny camera captured her pleading at my door. It caught the shadows, the trembling knocks, and the muffled sobs that still haunted me. James set his jaw and said, "We can do this." Fraud, assault, the paperwork on the land, the forged signatures. That's a heavy hand. He can't hide behind charm in court if the evidence is airtight. His voice was steady as a lighthouse. It anchored me. We talked strategy. File a police report tonight. Get an emergency protection order. Secure the video as evidence with timestamps. I asked him about Denise, the woman whose laugh had echoed in my daughter's worst nights. He looked up, eyes narrow. If she testifies, if she admits he confessed or involved her in the forgery, that will be the hinge. But you don't want to spook her. People like her are dangerous when cornered. He tapped the table. I'll call Rosales and put in motion what we need. I left his office feeling both lighter and heavier at once. There was a plan now, but plans don't erase the fact that the man who had eaten at our table and called me mother had a temper that broke people. That evening I drove, not as an officer, but as a woman with a quiet rage. Robert's pawn shop sat on the corner like a tooth in an old mouth, crooked, stained with cigarette smoke, neon sign buzzing. 2 of his boys were on the floor, laughing too loud. I walked in with the envelope on my shoulder and the badge inside my jacket, careful to keep my face unreadable. When you confront a liar, You watch for the cracks. He had one when he saw the folder. His smile thinned. Elizabeth, he said, feigned surprise, as though a mother-in-law princess had wandered into his den. To what do I owe this? Pleasure. I put the folder on his desk and opened it. I brought you receipts, I said simply. He glanced skimmingly, then laughed. You brought papers. What a surprise. You always were the literary type. My thumb brushed the small ridge of my badge beneath the jacket, and I did not think of how ridiculous it would look to flash it in a pawn shop. I thought of Sarah's lip, the bruise like a map of disgrace. I looked him straight in the eyes. We'll see this in court, I said coldly. Until then, you stay away from my daughter. He barked a laugh, full of contempt. Do you know who I am? You think your little folder will get you anywhere. But the laugh had lost some volume when his two men subtly shifted their focus. From me to the open door dot later that night. After I had driven back and checked on Sarah at Camilla's, watched her breathe under the covers. Like a small, exhausted animal, I saw messages on my phone from neighbors. Rumors, whispers, the small town oxygen of gossip starting to turn. I saw her with a black eye. He's a good man. Must be more to it. For a heartbeat, the weight of isolation slammed into me. People believed what's convenient. But then a different set of messages came. From others, Camilla's sister, the grocery owner. A woman I'd once helped with babysitting, each offering a little candle of support. That balanced the world. Two nights later, I sat in my unmarked car across from the Arch Bar. My camera in my lap felt like a talisman. Robert's truck rolled into the lot, and he emerged with a woman in red on his arm. All practiced nonchalance. Denise smoked as if she owned the air. The neon light picked out the sharp angles of their faces. I took photo after photo. Their hands, his license plate. The time on a nearby clock reflected in glass. Each frame was a small, cold bullet. When they disappeared down the street toward a dim hotel, I didn't follow them up close. You don't blind yourself with rage. I stayed distant, got the plate, the entrance photos, their arrival and departure times, then pulled back into the night. The evidence felt like armor. I had transformed fury into fact. Back at home, I laid out the files on the dining table. The photos, the hospital forms, the neighbor's video, the screenshots of the missed calls. The room looked like a case being prepared. I copied everything to an encrypted drive and told James to get a warrant if he needed the original footage fast. The law, I had learned, is a ladder. You climb it methodically or you fall. And I was done falling. When James called me the next afternoon, he sounded relieved. We can shut him down with fraud and criminal charges if Denise cooperates. She will need assurances. He was calm but deliberate. I'll talk to Rose Sales. We'll get witness protection set up if she agrees. Denise, I learned, had debt stacked in her name and a nest of lies that tied her to Robert. People like her choose self-preservation. The trick is to make the cost of silence greater than the cost of truth. I also knew that coercion and threats were a real danger. Men with power use fear as currency. So we offered her safety, not threats. I told James I'd talk to her. That sometimes, when you speak with the right edge of certainty, you can crack a person open enough for honesty to leak out. The meeting with Denise took place one night at the bar where she felt safe. I wore plain clothes and sat facing her, not as an accuser, but as a negotiator who had seen what happened when the law sat idle. When I slid the photocopy of the land transfer across the table, her smile vanished. Her hands trembled not because of fear for herself, but from the realization of how deep Robert's greed ran. You think you'll get a share? I asked quietly. He used your name, Denise. He forged signatures. You were promised land and money, and now you're the fall guy. She snapped for a second. Try ridicule. Then the fade broke. She confessed in fits and starts, texts, calls, whispered promises by Robert. At first, she tried to shield him with lies about not knowing the details. Then reality pressed and she admitted she signed papers under pressure, expecting that Robert would handle the legal steps. As I listened, I felt the fragile calculus of human desperation. She had wanted a way out of debt, and he had used her. Testify, I told her, not as a demand, but like sliding a rope across a cliff. Tell the truth. We will protect you. We'll make sure you aren't left holding the bag. She looked at me as if trying on an idea she had never allowed herself to wear. If I do, will he hurt me? If I had lied, she might have walked away. Instead, I told her the truth. I can't promise a peaceful path, but you will not be alone. And if you do this, he will not be able to walk free. She swallowed and nodded. That nod, a tiny, fragile surrender, shifted the axis of everything. Denise's testimony would be the match to light the tinder. She had the bank records, the receipts, the text messages that tied Robert directly to the forged documents. Once she decided to speak, James moved fast. Rosales set up the safe house, the patrols increased, and the legal papers were filed. The morning of the trial, I woke at 5. Home felt both sanctuary and staging ground. I made broth for Sarah, like I had when she was a child, and we fended off the chill together. I helped her into the pale blue dress James had picked for the day. Nothing flashy. Something that made her feel whole. We walked to the courthouse together, escorted by Rosales and an officer who had seen too many nights. The town square was a chorus of whispers. Some faces were sympathetic, others closed. Courtrooms are strange places where truth is performed in small, sharp motions, depositions, exhibits, an attorney's cadence. James presented the pieces like a craftsman, photographs with timestamps, a medical report, the video from Camilla's camera. When the footage played and the room heard my daughter's desperate knocking, I watched the air shift. People who had believed convenient stories now watched and reconsidered. When Denise took the stand, she trembled, but she told the truth. The trips to the registry office, the promises Robert made, the lies he fed her. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was real. Robert's lawyer tried to undercut her, smear motives, paint her as vengeful. He used every theatrical trick in the book. The courtroom is a theater after all, but factual evidence kept the stage steady. And then it was my turn. I stood, took the oath, and looked at the man who once called me family. I spoke plainly, not as an officer, but as a mother. I told the court who Sarah had been and what she had become, a daughter, a victim, a survivor. I described the night she came to my door, the bruise on her cheek, the way she had looked at me as though asking permission to live. Words in court matter because they are recorded. They get alive beyond the moment. When I finished, I felt both drained and cleansed, like a wound that had at last been cupped in someone's hands. The verdict was a mixture of legalese and moral clarity. The judge issued a protection order for Sarah, froze Robert's assets, and referred the fraud to the district attorney. It wasn't the final act. There would still be hearings, counters, appeals, but it put the brakes on his immediate capacity to harm. The sound in the courtroom when the gavel fell was a release. People exhaled. Some cried. I held Sarah's hand and let the air fill with ordinary oxygen. Outside, on the courthouse steps, people whispered, "Justice won." I felt the words like rain on parched earth. But what washed over me wasn't triumph so much as a cautious peace. We had turned a horrifying night into a ledger of truth and held the perpetrator to account. Not all wounds would vanish. Not all nights would return to easy sleep. But the charge had been answered. On the ride home, Sarah slept and her face softened. She woke, small and brave, and smiled. That honest, slow smile I had missed. When we walked into our house that evening, Miss Camilla was there with a tray of sweet bread, and the neighborhood was quieter, kinder. Some people came forward to apologize for their doubts. Some had never believed him. The town could be messy like that, quickly cruel, slowly kind. I kept the files in a locked cabinet and continued my work at the station the next day. There were other nights to patrol. Other calls where a woman's voice shook, and I had to decide whether to be the person who opened the door. Each case reminded me of that knock, that hour, that choice dot at night. In the quiet moments, I would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and think about what it meant to be a mother, to protect, to fight, and to teach a child that being brave is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway. We had started a war to reclaim Sarah's life. I had thought it would be about anger and justice. In truth, it was about the slow, stubborn work of assembling pieces, evidence, witnesses, courage. Piece by piece, truth has a way of rearranging the world. And when the neighborhood finally stopped whispering and began, instead, to look out for one another, I realized we had done more than win a trial. We had made a promise to each other, to the women who might one day knock at some other tired door, that someone would open it. The following morning, the silence in the house was unbearable. The clock on the wall ticked like a hammer inside my head. Every sound, every creak of the old wooden floor reminded me of the chaos that had unfolded the night before. My daughter, Emily, lay in the guest room upstairs, her body bruised, her spirit crushed. I could still hear her faint sobs from time to time, even though she tried her best to stay quiet. Perhaps to protect me from her pain as I prepared breakfast, my trembling hands dropped a cup. The shattering sound made Emily flinch from upstairs. I realized just how deeply fear had settled into her. The woman who used to light up every corner of this house was now hiding behind the shadows of shame and heartbreak. When she finally came downstairs, her face was pale, and the side of her cheek was still swollen. I tried to hold myself together. I wanted to be strong, but seeing her that way made my knees weak. I pulled out a chair for her and whispered, "You don't have to talk about it yet, sweetheart." But Emily shook her head. "Mom, I can't stay silent anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't go back to him." The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled. I reached out and took her hand. "You won't. Not while I'm here." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. He said, "It was my fault." He said I made him angry because I questioned him about her, the mistress, the woman who had destroyed my daughter's marriage. That afternoon, while Emily rested, I sat on the porch staring at the fading autumn leaves. I thought about all the times I had seen little signs, things I had ignored. The cold tone in her husband's voice during family dinners. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked about Emily's happiness. The hollow smiles that had replaced real ones. Regret hit me like a wave. I wished I had intervened earlier. I wished I had told Emily that love should never hurt this way. But now wasn't the time for wishing. It was time to act. I contacted an old friend, Clara, who worked at a women's shelter downtown. When I told her everything, she didn't hesitate. "Bring her here tonight," she said firmly. "We'll keep her safe." That evening, I helped Emily pack a small suitcase. Each piece of clothing folded felt like another goodbye. When she looked around her room one last time, her eyes filled with tears. "I built a life with him, Mom. How did it all go so wrong?" I wrapped my arms around her and whispered, "Because you gave your heart to the wrong man. But that doesn't mean your story ends here." The next few days were a blur. Emily moved into the shelter, where she began therapy. I visited her every evening, bringing homemade meals and soft blankets from home. Slowly, I started to see tiny flickers of life return to her eyes. One day, as we sat together in the small garden outside the shelter, Emily said, "Mom, I want to share my story. Not for revenge, but for women like me who think they have to endure pain to prove their love." I smiled softly. "Then you'll be helping others find their strength. That's the best kind of healing." She nodded. "But I don't even know where to start." "Start with the truth," I said. "Your truth." Weeks passed. Emily began volunteering at the shelter, listening to stories that mirrored her own, stories of women who had been broken, but were learning to rebuild. I could see her transforming, becoming stronger, more determined. But peace was short-lived. One evening, as I returned home, I found an envelope on my doorstep. My stomach twisted as I recognized the handwriting. Her husband's. Inside was a letter. "You turned her against me," it read. "She was my wife. You ruined everything. I'm not done yet." My hands shook. Fear crept back into my heart like a cold shadow. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't want to scare her, but I knew what that man was capable of. That night, I sat in the dark, listening to the sounds outside, every rustle of leaves, every car that passed. I felt like he could be watching us, waiting for the right moment. A few nights later, my fears became real. At around midnight, I heard footsteps near the back door. My heart raced. I grabbed the phone, ready to call the police, when I saw the door handle slowly turn. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No response. Just silence. Then the handle turned again, harder this time. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator, "Someone's trying to break in." Within minutes, sirens echoed in the distance. The moment they arrived, the footsteps disappeared. The police searched around and found footprints in the mud leading away from the house. Men's boots. I knew it was him. After that night, I couldn't sleep. I installed cameras, changed locks, and stayed up most nights, staring at the monitor feed. But I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. The detective assigned to the case assured me they were watching him. "We'll make sure your daughter is safe," he said. But the fear lingered like smoke in the air. A week later, Emily came to visit. She looked stronger, healthier, with a sense of calm I hadn't seen in months. She hugged me tightly and said, "Mom, I'm not afraid anymore." I smiled, but deep inside, I was terrified for her. That night, we sat together, sipping tea, when she suddenly said, "I've decided to file for divorce." My heart swelled with pride. "Good. It's time to take your life back." The next morning, she went to court with her lawyer. I waited outside, pacing nervously, my hands clasped tightly. When she finally came out, she had tears in her eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. "It's over," she said, smiling through her tears. "I'm free." I pulled her into my arms. "You're more than free, sweetheart. You're reborn." For the first time in months, I felt peace, real peace. But that peace didn't last long. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a familiar voice whispered, "You think you've won? You'll regret this." It was him, her ex-husband. Before I could say anything, he hung up. My heart pounded. I reported it to the police immediately, but they said they couldn't do much without proof. I decided to protect my daughter at all costs. I spent every night on guard, my phone beside me, my heart heavy, but my resolve unshakable. Then came the night that changed everything. It was 1 a.m. when I heard the loud knock at my door. My chest tightened. I rushed to open it, and there she was, my daughter, collapsed on the porch, her face pale, her lip bleeding. "Emily." I screamed, dropping to my knees. She could barely speak. "Mom, he found me." My hands shook as I dialed 911 again. I held her in my arms, crying, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." As the ambulance lights flashed outside, I looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "Not again. Please, not again." The sound of the ambulance siren still haunts me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see those red and blue lights flashing across my front yard, painting the walls of my home in chaos and fear. My daughter lay in my arms, half conscious, her breath shallow, her skin cold. I had never felt so powerless in my entire life. When we reached the hospital, doctors rushed her away before I could even say another word. I stood frozen in the middle of the corridor, surrounded by people in scrubs, machines beeping, and stretchers rolling past. Everything felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. A nurse gently touched my arm. "Ma'am, please take a seat. We'll update you soon." But how could I sit? How could I breathe when my only child was lying somewhere between life and death? Minutes turned into hours. The clock above the waiting room door ticked louder with every passing second. I clutched Emily's bag, the same one she always carried when she came home, and pressed it against my chest like a shield. Finally, a doctor appeared. His face was calm, but his eyes told another story. "She's stable for now," he said softly, "but she's suffered a head injury. We've managed to stop the bleeding, but she'll need rest and close observation." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat burned from holding back the tears. When I was finally allowed into her room, I found her lying still, her face pale against the white sheets. The rhythmic sound of the heart monitor was the only sign of life. I took her hand gently. "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe." But deep down, I knew safety was just an illusion. That night, I didn't leave the hospital. I sat by her bed, replaying everything in my mind, the warnings, the signs, the moments when I could have done more. Guilt gnawed at me like a restless animal dot at around 3 a.m. A soft knock came at the door. It was a police officer. "Mrs. Harris," he asked. "We caught the man responsible. He was found near your house, attempting to flee." For a brief moment, relief washed over me. But it didn't last long. "Will he stay in jail?" I asked, my voice shaking. The officer sighed. "For now, yes. But cases like this take time. You and your daughter should consider moving somewhere safe. Somewhere safe." The words echoed in my mind long after he left. A few days later, Emily woke up. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, and when she saw me, she tried to smile. "Mommy," she whispered. I leaned forward, holding her hand tightly. "I'm right here, baby." Her lips trembled. "He came for me again, didn't he?" I nodded, tears finally breaking free. "But he's gone now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." She looked away, her voice small. "I thought I could move on, but he won't let me." "You will," I said firmly, "because we're not running anymore." When Emily was discharged from the hospital, I decided to take her away, far from the city, far from the ghosts of her past. We moved into a small cottage by the sea, a place I had inherited from my parents years ago. The salty air, the sound of the waves, the quiet isolation. It was healing in ways words couldn't describe. Every morning, Emily would sit on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise. The first few weeks were hard. Nightmares woke her up screaming. She'd tremble whenever she heard footsteps outside. But slowly, day by day, the fear began to fade. I watched her laugh again. It was small at first, a fragile sound, but it was real. And I realized something. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a storm that passes again and again until you finally find your calm. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes, I found an envelope with Emily's handwriting. On it were the words, "For Mom, when I'm ready, My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Mom, if you're reading this, it means I've finally found the courage to tell you what I couldn't before. The truth is, I stayed with him longer than I should have because I was afraid of being alone. I thought if I loved him enough, he would change. But love doesn't fix broken people. It breaks the ones who keep trying. I had to stop reading for a moment because my tears blurred the ink. You once told me that strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It's surviving when you want to give up. I finally understand that now. You're my strength, Mom. You always have been. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming love and pride I felt for my daughter. Weeks passed, and peace began to feel permanent. Emily started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. She painted the ocean, the sky, and sometimes small birds flying freely. One evening, as we watched the sunset together, she said softly, Mom, I think I'm finally ready to live again. I smiled. You never stopped, sweetheart. You just needed to find your way back. She reached for my hand and squeezed it. Do you think I'll ever trust again? I looked at her, my brave, beautiful girl, and said, one day, someone will love you the way you deserve. But until then, love yourself the way I've always loved you. Months later, we received a letter from the court. Her ex-husband had been sentenced. Justice, at last. Emily cried when she read it, not from sadness, but from release. It's really over, she said, her voice shaking. I nodded. Yes, it's finally over. We stood by the shore that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned gold and crimson, the waves whispering softly against the sand. For the first time in a long time, there was no fear. Only peace. Emily turned to me and said, Mom, maybe we should help other women. You know, the ones who are still trapped. I smiled. That's the best idea you've ever had. And that's how it began, our new purpose, together. We opened a small support group by the coast. Women came from all around, broken, scared, uncertain. But they left stronger. They left knowing they were not alone. Every week, Emily would stand before them and share her story. Her voice would tremble at times, but her words carried power, the kind that came from survival. And I'd watch her with tears in my eyes, realizing that sometimes the deepest pain becomes the greatest purpose. Years passed. Seasons changed. Emily found happiness again, in her art, in her freedom, and eventually, in someone who treated her with kindness and respect. As for me, I found peace in knowing I had done what every mother hopes to do, protect her child, even when the world tried to break her. On quiet mornings, I'd sit by the window with my cup of tea, watching the waves crash against the rocks. And sometimes, when the wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the porch, I'd smile and whisper to myself, we made it. Because we did. We survived. We healed. We lived again.